Okay, on to part two. Well, first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to clean up this file a little bit, and I'm going to select both of these layers. Just click on one and, hold Command and click on the other one, or hold Shift and click on the other one, and then Command G will just group them together, and you can call this folder Effects. And then I'm going to just rename this Original Art. And I'm actually gonna take these two, put them in a folder, and call this WIP, which is common for work in progress. You'll see this in a lot of design studios, or this terminology. You may even use it in school already. And then again, I already have my design goes here, and you can name this like background or something like that. So again, just cleaning it up, and then of course we're gonna do Command Shift S to save it. I'll save this locally, and I'll just do my last name, and anything else you want to add. And again, just always good steps to remember is just clean things up, name your layers, and always remember to save. And again, if you want to name all your layers at the end, a quick way to do that is you can double click on one, name it, and then hold tab, and it will automatically highlight the next one to name. Hold tab again, just tab through them, and it'll name all the ones that are turned on. So that's easy. Okay, so next thing I want to show you is how you can clean up some of these details. So, again, this is kind of low res, and you can see some of these things are kind of like a little grainy, and that's kind of okay. I mean, especially at this level when you're really just trying to quickly come up with designs and structures, and you're not sure if you're going to use this structure, you don't really need to clean it up. But if you do want to spend the time and you find a structure you like and you want to clean it up, this is a way you can do it. So I'm actually going to go into that highlights layer, and I'm going to make a copy of it. Command J makes copies of layers, and I'm going to hide the original one, and I'm going to use my lasso tool, and this is a good selection tool when you're trying to grab shapes. And I'm going to kind of grab each one of these shapes individually and kind of do what I think is necessary to kind of like smooth them out a little bit or whatever. So I'm just going to start by grabbing, I guess I'll grab this middle shape. So I can actually just lasso by clicking and dragging this lasso around the top like that. And then while I still have my mouse clicked, if I hold down Option and then let go of the mouse click, it will give me like a straight line thing. And then, keep holding down Option. But again, I'm moving my mouse around, and then if I click in a spot, it will kind of just add a point there, and it still give me the straight line. Click in another spot, and maybe I need to go a little wider on this, and then I can click, and once I let go of Option, it will just complete the path. Like if I'm here, it will kind of complete it in line with this. If I'm like in here, it will kind of give like a little zigzag. You can see wherever you leave off your mouse point is where it completes that path to once you let go of Option. So I'm going to let go of Option now. And then it basically, again, just quickly makes a path and selection rather. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to blur this. So I'm going to go into, and again, make sure you have this part of the thumbnail selected on the layer, not the mask. But I'm going to go into Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And, you can see even just with like a 5 to 6 pixel blur, it cleans up a lot of that. I'll drag it down just so you can see, but it's kind of really grainy right here. You can see all this kind of fine grain. But once I move it up to like 6, 5, something like that, it kind of smooths all that stuff out. So that's really good. And again, I have a copy of it, so anything I do here is fine. It is destructive, but sometimes it's okay to work destructively when you're just working with layers. And if you are going to work destructively, just make sure you have copies of the original. So I'm going to use that same tool, and I'm kind of, just to kind of review. If I click in one point, if I click and just start dragging, it's kind of like a freehand selection, right? But if I click and then hold down Option, and then let go of the click, it gives me one of these lines to drag. And I can just kind of keep clicking with Option held down the whole time if I want. Depends on what I want. Or I can click, hold Option, and then, even though I'm holding that Option, if I click and drag, it still gives me this, freehand. So it kind of depends on how you want to make your selection. For this purpose, I'm just going to click, hold Option, and while I'm holding Option, just click a bunch of points to kind of surround this highlight on the right. Doesn't have to be perfect, but I'm going to do a different kind of blur to this one. I'm going to zoom in just so you can kind of see. Again, this is kind of grainy, but if I go to Filter, Blur, Motion Blur, what happens is you get this little wheel that you can kind of drag, and whatever direction you drag it, that's the direction the blur is going to go, because this is kind of like this, up and down mostly. It's like, slanted to the right a little bit. That's kind of like the direction I'll drag this into. And then you can see it kept like most of that original stuff intact, but it just kind of cleans up the, the blur. And right now I have this on 44 pixels. Sometimes it defaults to like 200 pixels or something. So you can just drag it around. And again, I'm dragging it back down to 1 or whatever, so you can see it has all this little kind of grainy effect going on. But the more I drag it up, the more it kind of just cleans that up. And you have to troubleshoot different structures and different highlights and what you might need to do to clean those up. But again, when you're dealing with low res images you might find, online or on Pinterest or whatever, you might just have to do some of these things to clean them up. You could also recreate your own shapes, which maybe I'll show you how to do really quickly. But anyway, I'm going to hit OK just to clean this up. And, again, you do the same thing for this side. And I'm just doing this quickly now, but filter. And, remember, anytime that you do like effects and things like that, usually it kind of comes back up to the top up here. And, you can basically just, always like repeat the last effect you did by clicking that up there. So there's that. Or if you can go down to blur and motion blur, just so you remember where the tools are. And again, I can kind of move this over so you can see, but I can kind of just make it a little bit go towards the other angle over here. And then I hit OK. And then, again, I just repeated the same blur, so it cleans that up. And the last thing I'll do is just do this top bit here. And, you can freehand some of it, or actually I'm going to start that over again because I don't want it to affect that side texture that's going on, because I like that kind of texture that's going on all along the sides here. But I'm going to make the same selection, and I'm going to use the same thing, a motion blur, filter, blur, motion blur. And it always makes sense to relaunch it if you want to change the angle of the blur. When you click it at the top, it will just repeat the effect. But again, you can kind of like play around with this too and see, like, maybe you want it to blur like more or less depending on what it is. But that was a pretty good amount to get rid of that. And that's pretty good. And then you can further, like, again, this is masked from the outside, so if I unhide this mask, you can see like there's some white stuff happening in the background too that's being hidden by this mask. But if I want to further get some more highlights out, I can go with my brush and, again, bracket right and bracket left makes the brush bigger and smaller, and then shift bracket right and shift bracket left makes the brush softer or more precise. So shift bracket left to make it more precise. And then I always go back to my brush settings to make sure that when I'm using a soft brush, I don't like the spacing to be at 1 because it gets kind of weird. So I'll just always go back to like around 25, something like that. And then when I brush, again, I can get rid of some of these bits, and it doesn't have to be like so much of the highlight. I can even tone this whole thing down a little bit if I don't want as much. Again, these are all things that you kind of play around with and decide for. So that is how you clean up, like, some of the details. You could do that with the shading too, but we didn't have to pull the shading out the same way, through like a curves contrast. The shading just existed on that pack, and it was pretty good, so that still should be pretty smooth. And it depends on what image you're starting with. This was a very white or light kind of background image. So if you're doing if you find an image that's silver or darker gray or an even darker color, you might have to mess around with the levels of it to get the levels of highlights you want. So that is that, and I'm going to stop and continue on in the next part. Thank you.